Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. This week changing it up a little bit, taking a bit of a break from designing a vehicle with wheels. This time around, taking a stab at designing a spaceship. Now changing things up a little bit, but still using the 4-step workflow that I've been using the last couple of videos. And again, this time incorporating a preliminary step before I jump into 3D using a sketching stage, just to make sure that I know exactly what I want before I dive too deep into the 3D phase. And I found that this was successful in my last video, so I'm going to be doing this moving forward, just taking the early steps, making sure that I have the silhouette and the ideas a little bit more fleshed out before I jump into more sophisticated, complicated software, right? Just to make sure that, there's something about drawing lines and just sketching things out before you get into software, right? And I mean, Photoshop is a software, but I could just as well be doing this on a piece of paper and it would be the same thing. So the idea here is just really just fleshing out ideas, making sure that I know what I want before diving too deep into it. And so here, now that I've come up with a strong sketch, I know what I'm doing. Now I jump into the 3D modeling phase and just taking what I had sketched out and just taking the silhouettes and the proportions, not going too deep into the modeling here, but just getting the idea across so that I can drop it into an engine so that I can light it and render it out before taking it into Photoshop to finally paint over. And so I had done that initial sketch again in Photoshop, and I'm not following everything here to a T. So I'm not trying to take every single detail that I had done in the sketch and stay 100% faithful to that. There's still a little bit of creativity that goes on here, but for the most part, the proportions and the ideation and the distribution of details remains the same, but there are a few things here in the 3D stage that do come up that I tell myself, it's like, oh, you know what, this is actually pretty cool, let me try this, and deviate a little bit from the initial sketch. And so I found that this is actually a very, very, very versatile workflow. So it's worked with vehicle designs, now doing a spaceship design here, and it can definitely work for environment design and as well as characters, right? I think using this workflow is extremely strong, and in a production setting it's actually quite beneficial because eventually these concepts will be given to a 3D artist or a production artist to make it game ready, or ready for an actual 3D shot and dropped into a 3D tool or a 3D workflow. And one of the benefits of doing a concept this way is that although the final model that you create here is not going to be game ready or anything like that, you can fire this off to a 3D artist to use as reference, so that at least they know the proportions and the scales that you've figured out here. And now getting to the lighting and rendering phase here. So this is probably the quickest part of the process, just dropping it into the engine and yeah, just getting some lighting. And then yeah, once that's done, like I'm not doing too many crazy things there, just dropping it in with some directional light and a skylight for the ambient light. And then once I've got a good angle, a nice shot from the camera, I render it out and then bring it finally into the final phase here, which is the 2D paint over, which again is my favorite part here. This is really where the fun begins. To me, this is the most creative part of the process. So here I've basically defined the box that I will be playing in for this session. And now it's like really time to play, right? And that's the way I see it. And yeah, this to me is the most enjoyable part of the process here. So now the first thing I really do is, go in, get rid of the 3D shapes, all the hard edges that you see. I try to soften them up where necessary. And really just try to cover the sort of the 3D footprints, right? And I mentioned this in previous videos, just adding those brush strokes and giving the piece that sense of handcraftedness via removing 3D, the sort of the artificial computerized details, I suppose. It really, I think, makes the concept stand out and makes it feel visually appealing, right? So really here I'm doing everything I can, from softening the edges, softening the shadows, just really adding that sense of craftsmanship. And for this design here, I'm really trying to be mindful of the noise distribution and the detail distribution. I'm trying to make sure that the bottom shadow parts is where the details go. So that's where I'm really adding a lot of the dark areas against the lighter areas, so that there's a lot of high frequency details to those spots. And then for the most part, other than the panel lines that I've drawn there, I'm trying to keep the surfaces that are getting hit by the directional light or the sun, as low detail as possible. I think one of the more appealing things, especially for something like spaceships, is, I think that the best spaceship designers really have a great way of distributing the details, and they know how to make use of something called eye rest, right? So you don't want something to be too overly detailed everywhere, because the eye will get super tired, right? It will just not really know where to look because of the ultra detailed surfaces. And so here I'm trying to incorporate that idea of just really trying to apply details in really determined spots and trying to leave certain areas quite free of detail. And I think having such a distribution will really make a design visually appealing. And so here for this specific design here, you know, there are no real spaceships to take reference from. I mean, aside from SpaceX or NASA space shuttles or whatever. But some of the references that I use here are, you know, actually construction vehicles and, you know, road maintenance vehicles, and as well as submarines, right? So even though, you know, especially for beginners, even though you're trying to design something that doesn't exist or is sci-fi, it still is very important to make sure that you have reference, because everything that I think good sci-fi really stems from something that is grounded in reality, right? So here, adding some more details to the front just to break up the silhouette a little bit more. And once again, you notice that I'm flipping horizontally here quite frequently, and that's a technique that I highly recommend, because just it really makes sure that your proportions are still feeling right. When you're adding details to your design, what really happens is you lose a sense of your proportion, and that's something that you can alleviate by switching back and forth horizontally to make sure that nothing is out of perspective. So that is a technique that I highly recommend. So at this point, I've added a multiply layer and added a blue paint to it. And then I chose this purple accent color. And again, using it very sparingly. And I've also gone in and darkened up the shadow areas. So anywhere that the light is not hitting directly, I chose to go in there and darken it up a little bit more just to increase the contrast. I found that it has improved the overall, it just made it look better to go in there and darken up the shadows a little bit. Everything seemed a little too flat for me before that. And then here I've added a color dodge layer and added sort of like a glow to it just to really make the bright areas pop a little bit more. And I think it really makes the concept feel a little bit more alive just by adding this extra layer here. Now here, once again, pretty much getting finished with the concept here, and now picking my spots for the emissive lights and accent colors. And the best spots for these are definitely the darker areas. And again, as always, use it very sparingly. You don't want to use it too much or it will lose its effect. And yeah, just finishing this up here. And this pretty much does it for this session. Hope you enjoyed. I certainly did. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any questions. And I'll see you next time.